Today I'm sewing and sharing the Noella blouse by Juliana Martejevs. This is a roomy collared blouse with an oversized pocket and a button-down placket. I always love when I can add a little touch of professionalism to my garments, so today I've added a Sarah Hart's label to the outside of my garment, sewing it into my pocket seam. I've left a link to these labels and to the garment below so you can grab your materials and sew along with me. So grab that pattern, cut out your fabric, mark your notches, and let's get started. Even though the pattern doesn't call for it, I've added interfacing to my center fronts. I've cut a strip of interfacing to match the length of both of my center fronts, and I've cut it to a width of 1.5 inches. This will give the fabric a little bit more structure when I go to add my buttons and buttonholes. And again, for added stability, I've fused interfacing to the wrong sides of one collar piece and one collar stand piece. Now I'm going to take both of my front blouse pieces and fold and press the center fronts to the wrong side right along the edge of that interfacing, which is 1.5 inches. I've also pressed that outer raw edge to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. Again, doing this for both center fronts for both of your front bodices. Now I'm going to take both of these front bodices to my sewing machine and edge stitch close to this inner fold from top to bottom for both blouse pieces. Now I'm going to use the button placement markings on my pattern piece to mark on my placket where I want to sew my buttonholes. And then I'm going to take this right front bodice piece to my sewing machine and sew my buttonholes into my front placket. I'm going to be sewing vertical buttonholes right in the center of the placket. To prepare our pocket or pockets if you're applying 2 of them, we're going to fold and press the top edge of the fabric to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. After you have that press in place, we're going to fold it once more by another 3/4 of an inch, press that edge as well. Then we're going to take it to our machine and edge stitch close to that bottom fold all the way across. Once you've sewn that top fold in place, take the remaining edges to your ironing board and press them to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch for the sides and the bottom of your pocket. On your front pattern piece, you have a square indicating where we're going to be placing our pocket. Mark the placement of this pocket onto your fabric in your preferred method. I've just used pins here to mark the bottom and side edges of where the pocket should be. Place the wrong side of your pocket on the right side of your bodice and pin in place. Now I'm going to take my pocket to the sewing machine and sew the side and bottom edges, backstitching at both of those top edges to secure. Before I sew my pocket in place, I want to use my pocket as a nice opportunity to showcase a garment label. I'm going to use a Love label by Sarah Hart's and tuck it right under the bottom edge of my pocket and pin in place. And now I'm ready to sew my pocket. Here's the top straight edge of my back bodice piece. I've marked the very center of the top edge with a pin. There are also notches on either side of this center point, which indicate how we're going to be folding this fabric to create the box pleat in the back. I'm going to take each of these notches and fold them toward the center. Keep in mind that the right side of my fabric is facing me. Once I've carried that fabric from the notch over to the center of my back, I'm going to pin it in place. Do the same thing for the notch on the other side. Now, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew this box pleat in place. Now that the pleat is created on our back piece, we're ready to attach our yokes. Place the bottom edge of your yoke right sides together with the top edge of your back bodice, and pin in place all the way across. If you find that the bottom edge of your yoke is a little bit longer than the top edge of your back bodice, go ahead and sew basting stitches all along the bottom of both of your yoke pieces so that we can ease it into the top of the bodice. Now I've eased in and pinned one of my yoke pieces right sides together with the top of the back bodice. Now I'm going to take the basted bottom edge of my other yoke piece and place it underneath both layers of these fabrics, so that the right side of the other yoke piece faces the wrong side of my back bodice. And now I'm going to pin through all 3 layers. Now I'm going to sew from one bottom edge of the yoke all the way across to the other side of the yoke. I'm going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew slowly and carefully so that I don't catch any puckers as I sew. Now that that yoke seam is sewn, I'm going to open out both of the yokes and give this yoke seam a really good press. I'm going to move that back yoke out of the way, and I'm going to place my front bodices right sides together with this outer yoke. If you're dealing again with extra fullness in this yoke piece, baste that seam and ease in the fullness, and then pin your shoulder seams in place. Now that our front bodices are connected at the shoulder seam right sides together with the outer yoke piece, we're going to roll up the bottoms of the front and back bodice pieces. This will help us keep this material out of the way as we attach the 2 yoke pieces. Now take the top shoulder edges of your inner yoke piece and place it right sides together with that outer yoke, so that the right side of our inner yoke piece is facing the wrong side of the bodice pieces. And add that to your pinning. And now we can sew these shoulder seams through all layers with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, sewing slowly and carefully so that you don't catch any puckers in your sewing. Now that our shoulder seams are sewn, we can pull the front and back bodices out from the neck hole, turning this garment right side out. And then give your shoulder seams a really good press. Before I attach the sleeve to my bodice, I'm going to press up the bottom hems. I just want to create a memory crease here so that it's easier for me to hem it later. I folded up the bottom raw edge of each of my sleeves to the wrong side of the garment by 3/4 of an inch. I've laid my bodice out flat on the table, so here's my front and back bodice piece with the yoke in the middle. Now I'm going to take the top of my sleeve and match the center notch of my sleeve right sides together with the notch at my yoke and pin in place. Now for the side edge of the sleeve, I'm going to match it up with the notch on my front bodice, allowing that front corner of the sleeve to extend beyond the notch by 5/8 of an inch, and pin in place. I'm going to do the same thing for the opposite side edge of my sleeve, allowing that side corner to extend beyond that notch by 5/8 of an inch and pin in place. Now I can continue pinning between my notches. Do this to attach both sleeves. Now we can take these pinned sleeves to the sewing machine and sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance from one side of the sleeve all the way to the other side of the sleeve, doing this for both sleeves. Now using a zigzag stitch or a serger, I'm going to finish the raw edges of both of my side seams, starting at the bottom edge of my front bodice, catching the seam allowance of my sleeve as I go, all the way down to the bottom of my bottom bodice, and again doing this for both sides of the garment. Now I'm going to place my front and back pieces right sides together as well as the sleeve, and I'm going to go ahead and pin the side seam and the underarm seam. Do this pinning on both sides of the garment for both side seams and underarm seams, and sew these seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance from the bottom of your bodice to the bottom of your sleeve. Now that this seam is sewn, I've gone ahead and serged the raw edges of my underarm seam so that they blended right in with the side seam, and I've done this on both sides. Now we can hem the bottom of the sleeve using that 3/4 of an inch memory crease. Fold that raw edge back to the wrong side, and I'm going to do a rolled hem here. I'm going to tuck the raw edge of the fabric to the crease and pin in place all the way around. Tucking that fabric to the crease all the way around to conceal that raw edge. Edge stitch close to that inner fold all the way around to complete the bottoms of both hems. The bottom hem of the main garment is also 3/4 of an inch. I've already taken it to the ironing board and pressed up that raw edge to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. Now, just as we did for the sleeve, I'm going to take the raw edge and fold it to that crease, and then on the crease and pin in place. Do this from center front all the way across to the opposite center front. Now we can take our garment back to the sewing machine and edge stitch close to that inner fold all the way across. Now grab both of your collar pieces and place them right sides together. Pin your collars together along the outer edge and the top straight edge, and then sew the sides and top of your collar with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now trim those top corners of your collar, and then turn this collar piece right side out. Poke out those corners, and then give this collar piece a really good press. Now we're going to sandwich the bottom of the collar between both of the collar stand pieces. I've marked the centers of both my collar and my 2 collar stands. I'm going to place them together so that the right sides of the collar stands both face the opposite right sides of my collar. I'm going to pin them together through all layers at that center point. Now I'm going to match up that very center of my collar with the notches on the collar stand and pin in place. And do the same on the opposite side. And then continue pinning those materials together all the way across. Now we're going to sew these collar stands together, catching the bottom of the collar as we sew. Start from one bottom edge of your collar with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and sew all the way across to the other end of the collar stand. Now we're going to clip notches into these side curves of the collar stand, clipping to the seam allowance and not beyond. And then turn this collar stand right side out. And give that a good press. Now we can attach our collar to the neckline. I've gone ahead and marked with a pin the center of my collar stand, as well as the center of my back bodice yoke. Attaching through only one layer of our collar stand, place that one layer right sides together with the top of your bodice. And pin in place. Continue pinning that one layer of your collar all the way around the neckline. Now that I have that one layer of the collar stand pinned to the neckline, from center front to center front, I'm ready to sew it in place with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Be careful to pull your other collar stand piece out of the way as you sew so that you don't catch it in your stitches. Now we're going to take this inner collar stand piece and tuck under that raw edge to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, and then place it over this seam that we just sewed so that it just covers those stitches and pin in place. Continue tucking that 3/8 of an inch raw edge to the wrong side, covering that stitching line all the way across. Now that I have that raw edge of my inner collar stand completely concealed and pinned all the way across, flip this over. I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and stitch in the ditch of this original seam line all the way across, so that as I sew, I'm catching this folded edge of the inner collar stand in my stitches. Now place your right placket over your left so that you can determine where you want to sew on your buttons. I've placed a pin at each point where I want to sew one of my buttons, and now I'm going to sew each button in the center of the left placket. And now we're all done with the blouse. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.